to us from China. And after that, we have Ronnie, who is joining us from Edinburgh, just as fabulous. So I'll hand over to you, Charlie, at this point, and we'll take questions in the chat as they emerge or via the mic if that's what you prefer. So I'll hand over to you, Charlie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. All right, can you all hear me and see me? Give me a thumbs up, Mary, if you can see my screen and hear me. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Charlie Reese, and I'm an educational developer at Xianjiaotong Liverpool University in Suzhou, China. And my topic today is making connections in virtual learning and teaching. I saw that all the other participants were doing sort of very big picture things, and this I hope is a little bit different. So it's a little bit experimental, and it's about my practice, a lot of the teachers' practice, or some of them at XJTLU, in trying to really make connections online with online learning and teaching. So I'm going to go fast in the beginning and then slow down a bit when I get to the new stuff, because I don't think I have enough time for all the things I wanted to get through. So this is what I'm going to be talking about: the benefits and challenges briefly of online learning, engagement and engagement online, and then the counterintuitive notion of physical interaction online, the notion of objective correlatives, which comes from literary theory, if you know anything about that, object-based learning online, and then have us all reflect. And the way I'd like this to work is, if you have any comments, please type them in the chat, and I've encouraged Mary to chime in or interrupt me at any time, because I would rather be interactive than just talking at people. So a little bit more about me. I'm the fellow of the Higher Education Academy. I'm director of the Educational Development Unit at my school and of our PG Cert. I'm active in SHED, SEDA, and the HEA. And I last week launched an organization called CAPED, the China-based Association for Partnership in Educational Development, because we as Chinese TNEs really need an association like SEDA or SHED here. And I work in classical Chinese knowledge and how it affects higher education, learning and teaching, motivation, engagement, transnational education, futurism and science fiction, and actually expertise. And if you see there's a space there, now all of us work in online learning and teaching. So if you didn't have that expertise 12 months ago, you're building it now, as I am. So this is China. China looks like a big chicken. I live right in the chicken breast. And so if you want to come visit, we're just by Shanghai, you're welcome at any time. Just let us know. So this is a question. This is a blank slide. And this is where I wanted people to be active in the chat. So what are the main benefits you think, in a word or two, about online learning? What are things that we've learned that's good about online learning? So I can't see the chat. So Mary, you're going to have to unmute and tell me.
Okay, Charlie, ideas mostly flexible in how we participate, flexible for some, not for all, opportunity for inclusion of less assertive students. It's moving very fast here. Connections can break down barriers, flexibility, involvement of the quieter learner through private chat and increased time without commute, democratic space for contribution, travel again, not having to travel, flexible learning for the commuter students and those with caring duties, but not for everybody, as we said. And it can be more equal for some, flexible and inclusive, alternative forms of communication, Charlie, which can be beneficial for the less forthcoming students, as was identified, and learning from people all around the world. So there's access to experts in a really useful way. So I think that's the majority of the comments there.
That's great. I like a lot of what the people said about the democratization of spaces, the less assertive students, as well as no commute time. Certainly, I've enjoyed that. I'll share with you something from our university, if I can move my slide. Ah, now I'm frozen. Hold on.
You're frozen.
Yep. And I can't unfreeze. Ah, good. So just a moment. I can do it from.
We're
Is the
losing you there,
benefit
Charlie.
both in terms of. Oh, so can you
You're
not
back.
hear me?
You're back. You're back.
Okay. So I'm only seeing a blank screen, so I'll just talk you through.
We've lost you again, I think, Charlie. Joseph, can you check in on Charlie, please?
Yeah, will do.
Thank you so much. While Charlie's gone for a moment, I'll just capture some of the other chat messages. So more effective use of online and collaborative tools and technologies, asynchronous and synchronous options, breakout rooms. It's all really positive comments for the most part.
Maybe one of the disadvantages of online learning when it all freezes and goes.
Yeah,
it's on
Charlie,
purpose, I'd say, Katrina.
Enacting it here.
Yeah, Charlie is trying to come in from China, so it just might be. I'm not saying that the Chinese have less technological advances than we do, by the way, but that might be why. Yeah, I've messaged him. I've emailed him and sent him a message via Zoom, Mary.
Okay.
He hasn't come back to me.
No problem. We'll hold
This
on.
isn't a very subtle experiential exercise by Charlie by any chance, is it? Because
well, I think somebody mentioned disruption was a form of creativity would be created through disruption in a good sense. So maybe this is an example in point.
Yeah, it's definitely an example of disruptive pedagogy, isn't it?
Isn't it just? Yeah.
if we all
Yeah, it's true about
should we all turn off cameras for the moment and see if that helps Charlie
helps.
connect.
Yeah, our advice to people connecting normally is to turn off their own mobile phones and any other devices that's connected to the internet or Wi-Fi in their homes, and that will make a stronger signal. But I'll turn off my video, that might work. But he hasn't replied to me.
And he had a very good pace going as well.
He's just restarted his computer, so he should be back in a moment.
Brilliant, thank you. A lot of people in the chat mentioned those students who weren't as forthcoming in the class, and they find that the remote learning encourages more engagement from those students. Would anyone like to chime in on that for a moment?
I think I'd put this into the chat that actually we're seeing quite an increase in the range of students, I suppose, compared to perhaps what we would have within a face-to-face environment, the number of people that are contributing. And if we make it, I think, clear around expectations that they can message privately, it helps to build perhaps their confidence a little bit in answering questions going forward.
That's super, Nina. And would those be, how large a class would that be with?
Mine is 128. So
You're
yeah.
getting quite a flow of emails.
Yeah, so mainly within Zoom with the private chat. So some people quite happy to chat with everyone to see, others just coming through within the private function to me, but it then allows me to pick up on anything that they're saying, and often probably what a lot of the rest of them are thinking. But yeah, certainly I think gives us a lot more access to some of those students that may have been perhaps a little bit quieter had we been face-to-face in that setting.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nina. And that's a point well made then, Helen, to supplement that. Do you want to come in on that for a second? Sorry, Helen's eating her lunch. Sorry, I'll comment for it if I can find it again, Helen. You know, that it takes students time to build their confidence, to become brave online and to make the comments out in the chat. Jackie Potter, you're saying you love the cameras on and off. Which do you prefer?
Hi, Mary. I think it absolutely should be the choice of the student. And if they want to have cameras off, then great. But I love the conversation that it's generating. It reminds me of the 90s when we talked about whether it was inappropriate for student learners to receive PowerPoints or teaching materials in advance of the session being broadcast.
Isn't that the truth? And look how far we've come from that. Jesper, you're saying that the cameras should always be allowed off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super experienced teaching online, but I also found that actually kind of by forcing myself to think about the fact that some students, and in my case, students will often be staff, they often prefer cameras off. It kind of helps me think about the engagement. How do I not just rely on the visual cues that I'm used to? How do I actually just accept that it's a different environment and I need to engage participants in different ways? And I think, again, accepting that there are so many reasons why students and staff won't have cameras on. And of course, I can try to understand them all, but I just think there are many good reasons. Some days I myself have a toddler running around and I just prefer having the camera off. So I think by not making it a big issue, actually, just thinking, you know, I can get engagement and cues in other ways.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the idea of the toddler running around, I think some of us like to have the distraction of, you know, I've noticed a lot of pet lovers, you know, suddenly cats and dogs and everybody's appearing in meetings and classes. But also I think a point was here made, and it was an email address rather than a full name, by somebody saying that academics are finding it quite difficult to teach to the blank screen. So at the moment I'm just talking to Joseph basically in the corner because we've all got our cameras off. So it can be, I suppose that's probably where we need to be more innovative, I think.
Yeah, just to, sorry, interrupt. Charlie is trying to join. It just says joining. It's taking, just seems to be having a problem logging in.
Okay.
I just wondered, Joseph, if Charlie can't make it at the moment, should we move over to Ronnie and ask Charlie to come back after Ronnie?
Yeah, we could do that if Mary's fine with that.
Is everyone okay with that? I'm happy with that.
So if we give Ronnie her half hour and then come back to Charlie, and that gives us a chance for SEDA office to beaver away in the background and get Charlie back online. How does that sound for, oh, hello. I have now tempted fate and it seems to have worked. Charlie is with us.
Hi, sorry, I don't know what happened. It was just massive systems failure.
Yeah.
Okay, Charlie, we've just had a chat about what was in the chat box in your absence, so we've probably dealt with that slide that you were going to fill.
Okay, great.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Let me, I'll just go a little faster. Let me share my screen. Thank you for the welcome back. And hopefully this will work this time. And it's not working. Hold on. Now it seems to be working. Okay, I hope you're seeing my screen. Is that right, Mary?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. All right, so this is the slide. Basically, things are captured, and then we pay more attention to the structure of learning. So the main challenge, as I see it, is really engagement. We're having a lot of trouble engaging students for a lot of different reasons. The background of COVID really doesn't help with that. In fact, it sort of exponentially magnifies the difficulty. And this was the theme of a lot of the literature about online learning, even pre-COVID, is that it's really isolating and you have to do more to engage students, make them feel like they belong, and then actually reach them cognitively in all the other ways. And we know engagement's talked about in many ways. So Elizabeth Barclay says it's a combination of active learning and motivation, and you need both parts. I think that jives with a lot of the other definitions that I'll talk about right now. So this is from International Journal of Educational Technology and Higher Ed, and that's my highlight. The behavioral, cognitive, and affective indicators show whether students are engaged or not. And we see that, and that's the next few slides, in a lot of different thinkers. And this is in the background of something very complicated, all this sociocultural sort of super complexity that higher education and students bring to the actual learning environments that we create for students in different contexts. So it's not easy. And I think basically when we think about motivation and student learning, so to get them engaged, we want them to own it. And so I narrowed it down really to 6 Ps. They have to be prepared. They have to have the proper perspective, which means they have to be aware that they're doing work and that to learn, they actually have to put something into it. And therefore it's participatory. In that, we should also offer them some choices. And this is key to engagement, is students have to have some sort of say in what goes on in classrooms. Otherwise, they're passive victims really of learning and teaching. Then they have to really metacognate and process how they're learning and why, because we are asking them to do things in new and sometimes much more difficult ways. So that's really key, especially with online environments, but really with any sort of non-traditional learning environment or non-traditional four-year learners. They have to really understand why you're asking them to do what you're asking them to do. So there's a lot of communication in there. And then I think it should also be programmatic, and that's the final P. And I take the sort of the section from Universal Design for Learning on engagement and use it as a highlight. The main difficulty really of online teaching is we get less information from students about how they're doing or how they're engaged or not, because we can't see them. So we can't make these mental state inferences. We can't hear them often. And if you've ever listened to your classroom, you know what it sounds like when students are engaged rather than non-engaged. So we have to think about ways to bring people in and orchestrate engagement. That's why I use the slide in very different ways that account for not having physical presence. And I think what we do is we use proxies that are physical to physical presence. And that's really the second part of my talk. So again, another model of engagement. This is the nucleus we see in all models now, which is Fredericks, Bloomfield, and Paris: behavior, emotion, cognition. We saw in the previous definition. It is also right in the center of Kahu's framework. If you see student engagement, affect is emotion, then cognition and behavior. And the clouds behind it are really a sort of representation of the super complexity that we think about when we think about contexts. And this maps everything out really clearly about how to motivate students. So if you look to the right, the proximal and distal consequences really would be how to explain the value in what we're doing with them, whether it mirrors real life or work or something else. So that was the first half. It was a lot shorter because you got to talk amongst yourselves. So this presentation was more interactive than I thought, just not for me. So now we're going to the second half, which is about the physicality of stuff. You can see marking student work is really important to do live, sort of via video and in real time, whether it's the still images I found or these 2 pictures on the right that come from our architecture department. This shows students, it's a model of cognition and how you think and how you use language in describing how a member of your discipline thinks. So this type of feedback, not just giving feedback, but giving it in real time, is one of the anchors, I think, to physically help students and go through their work to really bring them in and engage them. So this is part of what we're encouraging staff to do. Next, there are all kinds of activities that are probably very obvious to you that you can do, like shared whiteboards, mind maps that you can start out on shared whiteboards. And with those, you could either give people parts or let one group of students lead, because if everyone's doing something at once on a small screen, it's chaos. Or you can flip it and have them really bring something. So if you're going to make an image collage, maybe part of their pre-work was to find a relevant image, then they add them one by one and decide how they fit together, which would be a nice way to create an artifact and think about the content of what you're doing. And that might be actually sort of through images doing something like creating a mind map. So these are ways of interacting physically. Again, then I'm sure you're familiar with lecture slide enhancement. So, you know, I would leave it blank and do it team by team or person by person in terms of how I would ask them to enhance something. And this is something they generally do a good job with at almost every level in higher ed and seem to enjoy. Now, getting to more, I think, interesting content. I think these physical objects are really objective correlatives, meaning there's something objective that can be seen and known that correlates to the belongingness that we want for our students. And you know, this comes from T.S. Eliot. He's not actually the originator, but it's a literary theory term. And I think thinking in terms of anchoring what learning and teaching as well as belonging deserves its own name in a way for our practice, because it's really useful, I've found, in getting people to think better about learning design. So if you can see this image here, this is actually taken by one of our physicists. She had an award ceremony for her students that did sort of everyday life physics videos during the pandemic. And so here I am actually presenting the award to a student in Tanzania who won it. So part of our physical interaction with our role play of giving and receiving the award was part of the anchor as an objective correlative, as well as perhaps the award itself. And certainly him talking us through his video was also quite nice in terms of having something physical sort of to unify us. It was something to bring us together and manifest us as being in the same environment and having an identity. Now, other ways I do this, these are slides I'm using in development for staff in various ways. And I was thinking, you know, a lot of these software packages for video conferencing do things like poll in real time and other things. And that's great because it shows that you're all sharing opinions, but we can also do this in a way to ask people to draw on the screen. And so we can all see sort of how we're getting data in real time. So I asked people to do things on a spectrum. If you look at the top half, that's for talking to PhD supervisors about how they're supporting their candidates. And the bottom one is voting on whether we're going to do a group activity or individual activity in how we progress in the course of learning and teaching. And that was for something about action research. But I'm letting people not only vote, but then decide how the learning works in our interactions together. And this really helps them see that, yeah, they're part of the story. I can do things, or many teachers can, one way or the other, so that doesn't matter. But I also think the actual shared writing and being able to see their marks and where they aggregate is really important to belonging, which leads to motivation. It's the affect part. From here, I started thinking a lot about object-based learning, and this is in part because of one architect really at our school. But if you don't know, object-based learning is another OBL instead of online blended learning, and that uses objects as experiential learning. And I think we can take this, as counterintuitive as it seems, and use everything but the haptic or touch elements in virtual environments to really anchor what we're doing, give people something to focus on, especially if it's student made, but not necessarily exclusively that, so that we can really promote engagement and a sense of belonging. So that's kind of what I'm taking from this. And when you think about talking about an object or through something, what you're doing is really modeling disciplinary thinking, particularly if it's an artifact, but it could also be a drawing or something else, or something made by the group, even a mind map. So these are really the drivers of curiosity. And you can see from Kuraheva et al., I've taken her chart about interaction with the artifact, with peers, and then with the discipline. So we can see in the thinking about object-based learning a real ladder towards sort of socializing our students into disciplinary identity, which is ideally what we want. So, you know, if there's a process for this, it's really simple. Tell me about what you're seeing, or they would be touching and seeing in real life, but it doesn't have to be. And then, you know, what do you know about it? How do you interact with it? And then how does it relate to either the wider society, or if we're not talking about sort of sociology or museums, to the discipline itself. And this picture here is from John Latto. This is one of his architecture classes, and you can see the student on the bottom is actually sharing a model they built. And I have another one like
4
that.
minutes, Charlie.
Thank you. So I will actually finish on time. This picture is a picture of John, and he's doing a crit, and he's looking at a student model. What strikes me about this picture is obviously the student took it. And so I think she was thrilled and really engaged that she was getting this kind of attention, even though she was physically separated from the other students and from her teachers. And these are the types of things that the whole class participates in. So if I have a message for today, it's think physically about learning virtually, include objective correlatives and object-based learning in design. It's counterintuitive, and that's probably exactly why it's effective. So with the remainder of my time, I'd like to ask you some questions for the chat. You know, are you interested in these interactions online? What strengths do you bring? Would you support staff to interact physically and help them design for it? And what do you think you'd need to be able to do this? And I don't know if you can see it, but my email is there as well. So any feedback, I'd be happy to take. And again, I apologize for the technical issues. That wasn't my plan. Mary, is there any action in the chat?
The chat was very busy when you had disappeared, and there was lots of chats. So hats off to everybody for that. There's nothing in yet, except Peter is looking for anyone who's interested in talking mind maps and sketch notes to get in touch. So with the couple of minutes that we have, Charlie, does anyone want to come in on those key reflections that Charlie has identified there? You know,
just wondered, Charlie, do you want, first of all, a quick word to Charlie that folks who want to follow this up, Charlie will be with us next December for the postponed conference, there's postponed SEDA conference, so we look forward to seeing you then. You were talking about examples of using objects. Can you give us another couple of examples of where people have used it really to great effect with students?
Yeah, I think, so I'm now holding up an object. It's very common, but if I was talking to you about sort of density and cylinders and volume and space, it would be very, very natural maybe to do that in the classroom. But I don't know that we're doing it enough online. Also, what I would say is, if you looked at the direction of what was produced, a lot of it was student produced. And so when we model cognition in feedback, we should be doing that visibly with any kind of student work through video chats, whether it's written or models or drawings or analytic work like mathematics.
Yeah.
And Helen has said that she's used artifacts in her teaching. If you want to come in, Helen, on that.
Yeah,
Helen, are you great? Oh, hi, Helen.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I've finished eating my lunch now, so I can speak. I'll just pop my video. Sorry, my Zoom crashed temporarily. Hopefully you can hear me again now. Great, yeah, so I run a session around threshold concepts in an educational development session as part of our PG Cert. And when I've done face-to-face workshops, I've done an example myself called the toilet roll of time, where we use a toilet roll to illustrate geological time. So I ask everyone to bring in an artifact to describe a particularly difficult concept in their subject area, and then how they teach that. And we tried that online, and it worked really well, because it kind of gave, as Charlie's been saying, it kind of anchors people around something that they can then talk about, and it feels, I think they felt a lot less, a lot freer to talk about it, and less inhibited, I suppose, because they had this thing they could keep referring back to. So it worked really well. That was obviously with staff.
Thank you. We're really abstract a lot of the time, particularly with threshold concepts or just the big concepts that we deal with. So having something that people can find quite approachable. I mean, I know it's obvious to the classroom and it's less obvious maybe online, but this is part of just what I've seen working really well, because, you know, when I think about who didn't say, oh, last semester we had a problem with engagement, the people that still had engaged students, because we taught online all of spring semester, was our design school. So it was the architects and designers.
So I'm very slow, Charlie, to stop this session, but I'm conscious that Ronnie has to speak. So on that note, I'd really like to thank you for a really interesting and engaging session that I know we'll all be talking about on Twitter as the afternoon goes on. So hopefully you'll be able to catch up on that. And as Peter said, we're very much looking forward to welcoming you to Glasgow in December 2021, all things going well. So thank you so much, and virtual round of applause from us.
Thank you. And you all have my apologies about the crash.
No need to apologize at all. Thank you so much, Charlie. And I'll invite Ronnie, if you want to start sharing your screen at this point.
Thanks, Mary. Just one sec. Oh, drat. Sorry, I've lost the share screen function. Here I have. I've got it. Thank you. So, hello, everybody. Really nice to see you all there. Is that showing okay? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I don't know how on earth I'm going to follow on from the toilet roll of time. I'll remember that one, Helen. That's a great expression. I'm sure I can use it somewhere. What I would like to share with you is some research that I've been working on for about the last year and a half. It has resulted in a SEDA paper, which kind of belies the size of it, because it's about 80 pages overall, called Our Days Are Numbered. Obviously, deliberately ambiguous. Our days are numbered because we do lots of counting these days that we possibly didn't previously. But are the days of academic development numbered? Well, what I have found through the research is that the days of academic development are likely to be different, but we're not numbered. There's lots of demand, there is increasing demand, but things are certainly changing as a result of metrics. Now, what do we mean by metrics? Well, they are those measures that I'm sure you're all familiar with that are used to assess, compare, benchmark institutions and programs. You might want to play metrics bingo with your teams at some point. It's in this, an example is in the slides. We'll not go there today. What we will do is just mention how important metrics are to universities. How often have you heard senior managers in your institution talking about the league table rankings, your NSS scores on particular questions? There are so many manifestations. You could even go so far as to say that metrics have become existentially important to universities. They really are very important to how we're all going to fare in the future, from how it seems. Happily, not everyone takes things quite so seriously. So Wonky yesterday had what they called, I think it was a number of bonkers metrics the one I liked best was the Scrabble score that each UK university would get for the name of the university on the Scrabble board. So I think that's a great one that we should all definitely take forward. So I'll tell you a little bit about this publication, which I took on, I was an academic for 20 years. I was a head of academic development then for another 20 years. I saw a lot of change in the sector in that time. So when SEDA proposed a publication on metrics, there were things that I thought, yeah, that I really want to do this question that I would like to answer. One of them was the extent of engagement between academic developers and metrics, the effect of metrics. And I was really keen to think, how do we empower academic developers to have more of a voice in metrics? And in fact, one of the findings from the research was academic developers do have a voice in some respects, but only with regard to some metrics, or they think they do anyway. So these were the questions I was asking myself when I set off with the publication. So today, what I would like to discuss is the research, the backdrop to metrics, the experiences of academic developers, and I would really like you to think while I'm talking about the implications of this, because I have done lots of writing, lots of research. What I don't really know is, what do we do with that knowledge? How do we use it in order to take forward our own practices in our own institutions? So I'd really like you to think about that, and hopefully we'll come back to that question at the end. First of all, the research. Just very quickly, there was a literature scan, and I learned a lot about doing online surveys. Don't ask lots of open text questions for a start, but in fact, those open text questions gave me some wonderful, wonderful data. And I'm so grateful to the more than 70 heads of academic development or their equivalents who responded to the survey and really gave their lots of thought to what they were writing. 7 colleagues also wrote extended narratives, and they're my favorite part of the publication. They're very rich and give a wonderful insight into how people in different institutions are turning metrics to academic development purposes. And here are the names of some of those who wrote those narratives. Thank you so much. I know you're out there somewhere today, Alison, aren't you? So what did I find out from the literature? First of all, I found that there was a very set trajectory of metrics, and I had obviously experienced that in my own long time in HE. And I found dependencies between different levels, and I'll come back and explain that in a minute. I also discovered that there was a lot of critique of metrics and managerialism, of which metrics is a manifestation, throughout the literature. So that was very helpful for, obviously I wanted to take a critical perspective. And Baird and Elliott points out one aspect of that, the gameability of metrics, which I'm sure you're all aware of from your own experiences. Now, I'm going to try not to rant here, but my first draft, or the first couple of drafts of the publication were basically a rant. And I wrote quite a lot about the shaky underpinnings for metrics, which, as far as I was concerned, were leading to very shaky practices. I'm not going to talk about that, but just to show that I was aware that these things, there are so many things that are wrong with metrics. But I wanted to take a more positive viewpoint and ask, how did we get here? And how do we go on from here? And what might help academic developers in thinking about how they handle metrics in their own institutions. It's important that we take into account the backdrop to all of this. This I found really helpful, thinking about the genealogy of metrics, And I won't spend time, this is detailed more in the publication, but I remember in the mid-80s when things started moving from no monitoring and evaluation whatsoever to the introduction of the RAE. And where we're at the moment, reviewing the NSS, who knows where that will take us. But there has been a steady slide towards more and more metrics, more accountability over the last 20 odd years. So that trajectory is very clear. And the discourse that accompanies that, well, here's Sam Guima talking on Twitter about students needing to know about the return on their investment in higher education and wanting to set up a moneysupermarket.com for students. And it's very hard to either like or escape that language. So that's where we have been. What I discovered was that that trajectory has created an infrastructure which is symbiotic up and down the sector. So at the bottom of the pyramid, you've got local and subject area data, which used to be very informally dealt with, but is being increasingly managed by institutions. And then going up the second level, we have institutional data, which feeds into national data, which feeds into national evaluation systems, which feeds into international and national rankings. When I started, my assumption was that there was something happening top down, that government and other agencies were leading to us becoming more and more drawn into this metrics tunnel. What became clear, both through the literature and from the academic developers who provided data, was that there's a symbiosis right through the sector and that we are all drawn into working with metrics, and you could say we're complicit in that. So that's a bit of a backdrop in terms of the trajectory and the infrastructure that we now have. What have been the experiences of academic developers and what has it meant for their work? My own experience was something akin to the bereavement curve, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So looking back to around about 2005 when the NSS came in, I remember feeling very angry because I could see what was coming. And that anger was clear in many of the academic developers who responded to my survey. It also became clear that many were looking forwards rather than looking backwards to where we have been and where we can't go back to. And they were managing to integrate academic development into their practices, and they were much more accepting. So they were in a very different place. I'll not go into the conceptual framework that I used, but it's one you'll be familiar with. It's in the publication. But what I found was that academic developers' attitudes to metrics were complex. So here's one saying, I can see the value of evidence. I'm glad my institution is paying attention, but I really don't like the managerialism which goes with it. And I think many of us would share that sentiment. So what were some of the negatives that people expressed in the survey? They talked about skewed institutional priorities, ethical challenges, data taken out of context, lots of people unhappy about very poor use of data or misuse, abuse of data, and unintended consequences. Here are a couple of quotes. Things which can't be measured are expendable and tend to be ignored at the expense of the metrics. And that reflects the research done by Alistair Robertson, Fiona Smart, and Liz Cleaver on the intangibles. The intangibles tend to get ignored, but they're so important. Someone else talked about untold damage to teaching innovation. And we know this, when there is high risk, people won't innovate. Others talked about staff chasing the metrics rather than focusing in on their students, and DAF management decisions in response to poor results. My favourite one is this: the sector seems to use metrics much as a drunk uses a lamppost for support for varied political agenda rather than illumination. What a metaphor. So that says a lot about how people feel that metrics are not being used as well as they might by their institutions and by the sector. Having said that, there were lots of good and positive comments and many positive claims made by developers about their experience of metrics. They understood that the profile of learning and teaching was improving because of metrics. They had leverage for enhancement. They had gained fresh insights. One of them talked about, or a number of them talked about, insights into the student experiences as opposed to the student experience. Disaggregated data can help with that. They saw new models of evidence-informed practice emerging, and new models of enhancement-led academic leadership. That was something that you talked about in your narrative, Alison. A couple of quotes. One person said, "We have moved from done to done for to done with staff and students." Everybody working together to enhance education and the student experience collectively. And that collective working is a real finding from this research. There's a lot more collective working going on across institutions. Others talked about visible impact on the students' experience. They could see how their students were benefiting from the leverage of metrics. It's double-sided, of course. So in the first part of this quote, one respondent talks about shifts in work. It's made work more targeted. It's helped develop engagement with academic development. But at the same time, our work has had to become more instrumental. It's more bureaucratic. And this end bit, again, is another key finding. It has reduced the amount of generic educational development or interest-driven work that we do. If you're busy helping with assessment and feedback scores, you're unlikely to have as much time to work on generic staff development. So what are the implications for our work going forward? The changes are quite important. We see resources changing depending on whether metrics are being resourced or not, whether academic developers are involved in metrics or not. Workload is going up. Collaboration with other professional service departments and others is going up. The focus of workshops is changing. Far less of the typical workshops that might have been on our previous calendars of workshops, more targeted workshops that senior managers might be more interested in. So some activities are going up and some are going down. This image of push me, pull me kept coming to my mind when I was reading these the divergence in experiences. People were experiencing much more demand-led prioritization of the work, instead of the supply-led work that we tend to concentrate on or have tended to concentrate on as academic developers. In other words, more top-down, less bottom-up. What does that look like? Well, on the supply-led, the stuff that we would typically offer as academic development departments, more individual and operational, comes out of our own planning. There's more academic development that is generic, whereas the demand-led stuff coming down from senior management as a result of metrics is more strategically focused. It's very much about supporting metric improvement, and the academic staff development is increasingly about improving metrics such as, for example, fellowship numbers. So the future is, the academic developers were saying that they could see metrics-driven agendas going up, much more work in supporting metrics, funding being metrics related, and they could see less generic staff development and less freedom to determine their own academic development agendas. I'd like to finish on this quote, which is an important one. The challenge, if you read the second part, is for educational developers to demonstrate their value in relation to metrics while not losing sight of our values. That's a real difficult balance for us to achieve. What does it mean? It means we have to continue critiquing poor use of metrics. We have to hold up that mirror. We need to continue tapping the advantages for learning and teaching. We must get to grips with quantitative data. Many of us aren't very good at gathering, using, reporting on the quants, but we have to do it within the context of the stories and the qualitative data that we know tends to be ignored. Wenger and et al. Said, no indicators without stories, no stories without indicators, a really important statement. Now, David Baum, I think you're out there in the audience. You once said to me that, and you don't remember when it was, and I don't either, but it stuck with me. And to me, it's a really important characteristic of educational development that we are principled, pragmatic opportunists. Those are really key characteristics for working within this metricated culture. I would combine that with a real strategic focus and say that's part of the tool set that we need to take forward in dealing with metrics. It's not going away. So how do we manage strategically to take our work forward in this updated culture? And my question that I asked you at the beginning is, so what? Are there things in this that you think you can take into your own context? If we don't get the chance to discuss this now, I'd be really interested. My email address is at the beginning of the slide. I'd be really interested to hear from you if you have ideas on how to take forward the practice and the application of this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. Lots of food for thought there, and there's lots of chat going on in the chat box, which you'll be able to see now yourself, or if you want me to go through it for you.
If you're happy to field any questions, because I've not seen any of it, Mary, that would be great.
There was a discussion around the type of things that we're actually measuring. You know, are we measuring for measuring's sake? Or, you know, should we have a say in what's being measured and to take that to the next level? So David Baum, you contributed a lot. Do you want to come in there, David B? No, okay.
Take two. I'm glad principled, pragmatic, opportunist still works. Pragmatic is about what's possible, and principle is about the sense of direction. And that's why I'm so glad that teaching in higher education and academic development have a basis in values. But that doesn't mean they can't be measured. If we want to get to some high level skills like being scholarly, you can demonstrate scholarship in your practice. You can demonstrate the commitment to student collaboration by the number of student collaborative activities you put in the courses and programs you design, and by the effort you put into supporting and rewarding students taking part in those activities. There is usually a way of finding something measurable which doesn't distort unduly. It's an academic quest. As I said in the chat, we're stuck with metrics. Let's apply our considerable collective intelligence and values based to making sure we're measuring the right stuff. Because if we give up on that, somebody else will determine the measures, and they'll be the wrong ones. This is no time to fold. It really isn't. That was really, I enjoyed the clarity of thought and the data there, Ronnie, very much indeed. Thank you. It was great.
Thanks, David. The question of who's measuring what is absolutely fundamental. And what I saw in the data that was hardly anybody objects to measurement. I don't think anybody objected outright to measurement or evaluation. These are real helpful activities. The question is, what can we measure that is helpful for student learning and for enhancing our practices, rather than what I have called metrication, which is the use of metrics for managerial and accountability purposes. So if we as academic developers can encourage the use of metrics in combination with other data to improve student learning, then all of us are in favour of that. But we've somehow felt a bit overwhelmed, I think, by the strength of the other voices of the quantitative stuff, which is so important to our senior management.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, David. Does anyone else want to come in? Neil, would you like to come in? Ava, are you trying to get in?
Yeah, I mean, it occurred to me that your talk, the reflection on how we use metrics, might require us to reflect critically on our role as third space professionals, interfacing between students' experience, academic teaching and learning, and the kind of broader professional services identity. So really, for us to use metrics effectively and to influence their use, we need to be clear about our own kind of hybrid identities. And then perhaps we're better placed to shape a kind of values-led conversation about metrics.
Yeah, if I can say something about that interface, Eva, that came across strongly in the data, the amount of collaboration that was going on. And I think that has real implications for the nature of what we do in academic development and who we do it with. People are collaborating a lot more with people who might previously have been seen as strange bedfellows, like the business intelligence unit or the planning department or recruitment and admissions. So there is some real work to be done in thinking about how to take forward those collaborations constructively. And one of the things that may happen going forward is we may see more academic development units being restructured to be working structurally more collaboratively with others. That's something which could possibly be happening. But I think it's a question we really need to ask ourselves and our colleagues. How do we use those interfaces productively?
Thank you, Ronnie. And Rosalina, would you like to come in from Canada there? So I'll just read out the comment in the chat there, Ronnie. For me, reflecting on the theoretical underpinnings of metrics, theoretical underpinnings of managerialism, and thinking about how these can be used to enhance learning experience by blending qualitative. Can't get to the rest of the comment. Can anyone else see that? I'm sorry, it's moving too fast on me. The qualitative and quantitative data to get the whole picture holistically.
Yeah.
That's what Rosalina commented.
And the theoretical and indeed the philosophical underpinnings of this are really, really important, because philosophically, I'm quite opposed to extreme measurement or the use of measurement in ways which I don't think are compatible with our academic development values. But we've somehow got to work with different philosophies in this particular culture that we're working in, rather than simply saying managerialism is rubbish, and I'm having no truck with it. We've somehow got to philosophically tread that balance. And of course, academic developers are always walking tightropes. We're very good at balancing between different ways of thinking and practicing.
And I think that sums it up perfectly, Ronnie, for today's session. So all that it leaves us to say is thank you so very much for your presentation, for the stimulating discussion that I have, again, no doubt will continue. And I will hand you over to Joseph, who might want to finish up our recording, I'd say. So thanks everybody for attending, and hopefully we'll see you all again tomorrow.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. I'll see you all soon. I'm going to stop the recording now.